General Hospital will reveal as the final lights of the 2025 Nurses' Ball stage dimmed and the echoes of applause faded into uneasy whispers, an electrifying silence swept through the room. Michael's sudden appearance at the back of the ballroom was nothing short of seismic. He didn't speak, didn't acknowledge the stunned faces or the shifting glances of those around him. His focus was singular. His eyes locked on Wiley, the young boy who had been the center of a months-long custody battle and the heart Michael had fought through fire to reclaim. In that moment, the spectacle of the gala vanished. The music, the laughter, the chaos, it all fell away. The room was now a theater for something far more profound, a reunion born not of ceremony, but of survival and desperate longing. Michael crossed the room with the quiet fury of a man who had endured too much to be stopped by social decorum. His movements were steady, calculated. As he reached Wiley and pulled him into his arms, there was no fanfare. It was not a scene meant for spectacle, but it carried more emotional weight than anything that had transpired on stage that night. The embrace was long, tight, unshakable. An anchor between a father who had nearly been lost to the world and a son who had been made to live as though that loss were final. In Michael's arms, Wiley trembled, clinging to him with the full force of a child's longing. This was not a simple gesture of affection. It was reclamation. It was defiance. It was love refusing to die in the shadows of grief and manipulation. Elsewhere in the ballroom, Willow and Drew were still engaged in quiet negotiations with Carly, attempting to strike what they believed to be a fair compromise. They spoke of weekend visits and shared summers, convinced they held the upper hand in a battle they barely understood. To them, Michael was still away, unreachable, a ghost wandering some medical facility abroad. But as Carly's expression darkened, and the room fell into hushed awe, they turned to witness the exact moment their assumptions crumbled. Michael didn't wait. He didn't consult. He simply walked out of the gala with his son in his arms, leaving behind stunned gasps and stunned silence in his wake. He didn't return to the Quartermain mansion. He didn't retreat into some fortified compound of wealth or privilege. Instead, he went home. The only home that had ever mattered when everything else fell apart. Carly's house, humble in comparison but rich in history, comfort, and love, became their sanctuary. It was here, within its softly lit walls, that Wiley finally broke. The quiet child who had endured more than any child ever should, dissolved into sobs as he nestled into his father's chest. His tiny hands clenched the fabric of Michael's shirt as if afraid this moment might be stolen too. In that small living room where so many lives had unraveled and been pieced back together, a child finally allowed himself to feel safe. The tears came not just from joy, but from months of silent suffering. Wiley spoke in broken, trembling sentences, of nights spent staring at the ceiling, wondering where his real daddy had gone, of being corrected when he called Michael's name in his sleep, of being told to call Drew Dad when his heart refused to forget who had truly held that title. He told of how he had learned to stop asking questions, how he smiled to avoid upsetting his mother, how he tried to be good so no one would send him away again. Every word from Wiley was a wound laid bare, and every word Michael absorbed was a silent scream in his soul. There was no forgiveness in his eyes, only fury, only sorrow, only the resolve of a father who had let too much go unanswered for far too long. Michael listened, knelt before his son, and held him until the sobs quieted. That night, he didn't sleep. He watched over Wiley and Amelia, sitting in the hallway between their rooms like a sentinel refusing to blink. Carly didn't ask questions. She brought him coffee, whispered that she'd take care of things, and left him in the dim glow of night with the weight of his children's safety heavy in his lap. For the first time in months, Michael wasn't a patient, a fugitive, or a memory. He was simply a father, wounded, but unbroken. Outside that sanctuary, the chaos was just beginning. Word spread quickly through Port Charles. The man everyone thought was gone had returned with purpose, and the power shift was immediate. Willow was shattered. The woman who once saw herself as Michael's partner now stood on the outside, watching the man she once loved transform into someone she no longer recognized. And Drew, once confident in his role as a stepfather and ally, now found himself powerless, outmaneuvered by Michael's silent war. Neither of them had expected the emotional truth to be so loud, so undeniable. They hadn't expected Wiley to remember, to feel, to speak. But he had. And because he did, everything changed. Michael sat in silence as his son poured out the memories he had no business carrying at such a young age. Every word from Wiley felt like a blade slicing deeper into the guilt Michael had tried so long to suppress. He listened, motionless, his jaw clenched and eyes dark with a quiet storm. The boy's pain wasn't theatrical, it was raw, involuntary, and unmistakably real. Michael thought of the months he had been gone, the nights spent in a hospital bed far from home, and the days he was declared lost to the world. He thought of Carly, his mother, who had endured in silence, never giving up on him, never letting go of the belief that her son would return. And now, it was all laid bare in front of him. His child, confused and fractured, spoke of how his emotions were dismissed, his identity distorted, and his longing for Michael turned into something shameful by those who were supposed to protect him. The weight of it all was unbearable. Michael realized in that moment that there was no room left for hesitation, no time for indecision. This was not merely about custody, it was about rescue. The courtroom was no longer a legal battleground, it was a field of moral reckoning. He had to step forward not just as a father, but as a shield. Every move from now on had to count. Every step had to be precise. There would be no revenge, no theatrics, only the truth, backed by evidence and the unshakable instinct of a parent who refused to watch his child suffer any longer. What he brought to court wasn't born from bitterness. It was a desperate plea wrapped in proof. He presented security footage from Drew's residence, scenes where Wiley flinched at being reprimanded harshly, where his confusion turned into silent compliance. Clips where Drew raised his voice over trivial mistakes, his tone cold and corrective, not nurturing. But perhaps more devastating were the moments when Willow simply walked away, distracted by her own ambitions or tangled in her new relationship, leaving Wiley alone with his hurt. These videos weren't edited for impact, they were brutal in their normalcy. Alongside the visual evidence, Michael introduced a psychological evaluation conducted by a licensed child therapist. The findings were deeply unsettling, signs of mild anxiety, behavioral withdrawal, trouble sleeping, and a recurring tendency to dissociate during moments of conflict. The expert testified that these were not random symptoms. They were the natural responses of a child feeling emotionally displaced and insecure. Wiley's drawings, reviewed as part of the evaluation, depicted houses with no doors and faceless adult figures, a subconscious metaphor for his inner world. It was an unspoken cry for structure, for connection, for safety. Michael didn't need to speak much. The evidence spoke for him. In contrast, Willow took the stand composed and rehearsed. She painted herself as a devoted mother who had simply done her best in difficult circumstances. She described routines, school attendance, doctor appointments, all standard fare for someone trying to demonstrate competence. Drew spoke logically, pointing out that he had provided stability during a chaotic time. He stressed that Michael had been presumed dead, that they had done what they thought was best, and that the children had never been in physical danger. But logic could not outshine emotion, and the courtroom wasn't deaf to the invisible scars now documented and laid bare. When the judge turned to Michael, he did not posture. He simply stated one thing: Wiley had been denied the love he deserved, and Michael had returned not just to claim a right, but to fulfill a duty. He described his efforts to recover, not for himself, but for his family. He talked about waking up in Germany, half alive, haunted by the last thing he remembered. His son's laughter, and how that single memory fueled every grueling step of his rehabilitation. The judge listened in silence, nodding slowly, visibly moved by the difference between what was claimed and what was lived. The decision came swiftly and with surprising clarity. The court granted Michael temporary sole custody of both Wiley and Amelia. The judge's ruling emphasized that while both Willow and Drew had acted under the belief that they were doing the right thing, the emotional well-being of the children had clearly been compromised. The court ordered a full re-evaluation of Willow's parental capacity and placed her visitation rights under supervision until further notice. Drew was not granted any independent guardianship. The silence in the courtroom was profound as the gavel fell. It wasn't just a legal conclusion. It was the sound of a narrative collapsing and a new one beginning. Willow remained seated, frozen. Her carefully composed image now cracked under the weight of disbelief. She had lost more than a custody battle, she had lost the trust of her child. Drew stood beside her, stunned, offering no comfort. The man who had once stood so confidently beside her now looked small, diminished in the face of truth. Neither of them had expected to lose. Neither of them had expected Michael to return, not like this, not with such force, with such purpose, with such undeniable love. But he had. And because he had, everything changed. In the aftermath of the ruling, Willow crumbled. The courtroom had emptied, the echo of the judge's decision still hanging like an oppressive weight in the air, but she remained seated, staring at the spot where her son had once stood. Her fingers clenched the edge of the wooden bench until her knuckles turned white, her chest rising and falling in stifled gasps as reality crashed down around her. It wasn't just the loss of custody that shattered her, it was the public rejection, the raw and unfiltered truth that Wiley had spoken without hesitation, that struck with devastating clarity. She had never imagined her son would so clearly and completely choose Michael. She had expected tears, confusion, maybe even resistance. But instead, she had watched Wiley run into Michael's arms with the kind of certainty that only a child can possess when he knows exactly where he belongs. Willow replayed the last several months in her mind, the decisions she had justified, the alliances she had formed, and the excuses she had whispered to herself late at night to quiet the growing voice of doubt. Her relationship with Drew, which had started as comfort in crisis, had evolved into a complicated entanglement of shared ambition and emotional dependence. Her estrangement from Carly, fueled by pride and deep-seated resentment, had left her isolated from a woman who had once been her fiercest advocate. And now, all of it, every decision, every fracture, every misplaced loyalty, had led her here, to this precise moment of loss. She stood slowly, her legs unsteady beneath her, and exited the courtroom without a word. Drew followed, his own silence thick with defeat. The man who had once stood beside her as a protector now felt more like a shadow, present, but powerless. Neither of them had the strength to speak. The corridors of the courthouse felt longer than ever, each step echoing their unraveling. While Willow was unraveling, Michael was not celebrating. There was no smile on his face, no sense of vindication in his posture as he carried Wiley and Amelia out of the courthouse. He didn't linger for press or sympathizers, didn't exchange triumphant glances with his legal team. He simply returned home. Not to the Quartermain estate with its prestige and grandeur, but to the warmth and familiarity of Carly's house, a place that had always grounded him when life spiraled out of control. That night, there were no announcements, no celebrations, only quiet. Michael tucked Amelia into bed first, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead before gently closing the door. Wiley, still clinging to his father's arm, refused to sleep in a separate room. Michael didn't question it. He lay beside his son on the living room couch, pulling a soft blanket over them both as the hum of the quiet house settled around them. There, in the dark, with the rhythmic sound of Wiley's breathing beside him, Michael finally exhaled the breath he'd been holding for months. It wasn't joy that filled him, it was relief, tinged with exhaustion. The battle had been long, brutal, and filled with moments that threatened to break him. But now, his children were safe. That was enough. From across the room, Carly watched. She didn't approach, didn't interrupt. Instead, she stood by the staircase, a quiet witness to a reunion she had fought for with every ounce of her being. Her eyes welled with tears as she watched her son cradle his own child, a full-circle moment born from relentless maternal love. Every choice she had made, the decision to fly to Germany, to pressure the doctors, to push for an expedited court hearing, had culminated in this one moment. She had never needed thanks. This peaceful silence, this fragile sense of normalcy, was all the repayment she would ever want. And in the shadows beyond, Jason remained, just as he always had. He had not argued in court. He had not stood behind the bench. But his presence had been no less vital. From the moment Michael returned to Port Charles, Jason had been there, at the gala, in the courthouse hallways, by Carly's side, at the gate when things turned dark. He was the quiet force behind Michael's steadiness, the silent assurance that no matter how deep the waters rose, Michael would not drown. It was Jason who had stepped in that night at the nurses' ball, blocking Willow and Drew from pursuing Michael as he carried Wiley out. He had spoken just one sentence, but the look in his eyes had said everything. They would not stop Michael tonight. Jason did not require acknowledgement for his loyalty. It ran in his blood, in his sense of duty, in the unspoken vows he made long ago to protect the Corinthos family in all its forms. As he watched the family reunited beneath Carly's roof, he knew his role wasn't done, but for now, for this brief moment, the battle had been won. He turned away from the window and disappeared into the night, leaving behind the quiet hum of peace finally earned. News of the custody battle quickly spread across Port Charles, sending shockwaves through the community and leaving it sharply divided. Some rallied behind Michael, believing he had already endured far too much loss and heartbreak. Others, however, sympathized with Willow, a single mother who now had nothing left. But amidst the opinions, debates, and whispers, there was one truth no one dared to deny: Michael had acted like a true father. He didn't hide. He didn't compromise. He stood his ground and fought with everything he had to protect his children from further harm. Just a few days after the verdict, Willow quietly left town. No one knew where she went. She left behind no fanfare, only a single handwritten note addressed to Drew. In it, she confessed that she needed time to rediscover herself, time to learn how to be a mother again from the beginning. It wasn't an escape as much as it was an acknowledgement of failure, a surrender to the painful truth that her decisions had led her here. Drew didn't follow. He didn't try to track her down or persuade her to stay. Deep down, he understood. He too needed a new beginning, one that took him far from the judging eyes and unspoken verdicts of a town that once embraced him but now only offered silence. Michael, meanwhile, had become more than just a father. He was a victor. Not in the traditional sense, not by status or wealth, but in the quiet triumph of a man who had reclaimed his family through unconditional love. He didn't need a mansion or legacy to prove his worth. All he needed was a modest home with Carly, where his 2 children could sleep without fear, where laughter and the sound of piano keys could fill the house each evening, reminding him that peace had returned. That was enough. And on that very first night, with Amelia sleeping soundly in Carly's arms and Wiley curled tightly against his chest, Michael lay still on the couch, staring up at the ceiling. For the first time in years, there was no dread in his heart, no ache in his soul, only calm. A quiet, grateful smile crossed his face as he finally allowed himself to believe that all the pain, all the loss, all the battles he had faced, had been worth it.